Well, let's go with our source right now. Taylor is ready to go. So go right ahead and inform us.
All right, so my source was the Kitab al-Aghani written by Abul Faraj al-Isfahani.
Ooh, that was good.
Has a nice ring to
Spell
it.
that without looking at it.
What?
You spell that without looking at it.
Spell it. Okay, ABU' space FARUDG. Oh no, there's an A. Dang it. Oh, whatever.
Try that.
Close.
Point is, I wish I had that name. But
Yeah, Isfahani, that's a city. See, it
yes,
says
Isfahan
the
in
father of Farad, the Isfahani, the guy from Isfahani. And Kitab means book in Arabic.
Book of Songs.
Al-Aghani. Okay, the book of songs. All right, let's go.
Yeah, so
Beautiful.
it's the background of Ali Isfahani. He lived from 897 to 967. What he mainly wrote about was about the Caliph Harun al-Rashid. That was pretty much the golden age of the Abbasids. And he lived close enough to where it was still relevant, but far enough away where he could look in retrospect and see what's the impact of that time period. It's like us looking at World War I now and saying, what's the impact of this? It's still relevant to us, but at the same time, we're far enough removed where we can see what has happened since. So he was a historian and musicologist, which I found interesting. A musicologist, from what I understand, kind of analyzes music, art, like poetry from a more scientific approach. It's not so much the performing, but it's essentially a historian of music. He focused mainly on Arabic poetry. Makes sense. He was part of the Abbasid dynasty, and his big work was the Kitab al-Aghani, which is the Book of Songs. And this right here is this picture is the cover of the Kitab al-Aghani. I'm guessing that's Harun al-Rashid, the
This
Caliph.
is album cover.
Yes, his debut. So the specific section that I read, the focus was about the relations between the Byzantines and the Abbasids under al-Rashid. So it spoke specifically about this man named Nikephoros I. He was a ruler of Byzantine Empire from 802 to 811. So some backstory of that, there was this guy named Constantine VI, and he co-ruled with his mother for some time, for about 10 years, and then he declared himself the sole ruler. He locked his mom up in the palace for about 2 years, and then after he lost some battles, he's like, maybe I can't do this on my own. So he's like, all right, Mom, I'll let you help co-rule again. So then she co-ruled for about 5 more years, and then she planned a coup to overthrow him, gouged out his eyes and blinded him, and then declared herself ruler. So
maybe that's why he had her locked up for a while.
Probably. I hope my mom doesn't do that to me when I take over the world. You know, just,
Wow. We've learned a lot here.
Yes. So Nikephoros, he was the I believe financial advisor to Irene, and he overthrew her as well, declared himself ruler. And Irene, she didn't want to fight against the Abbasids. Instead, she paid tribute to them. Nikephoros said, no, I'm not doing that. And so he wrote a personal letter to the Caliph saying, you better give us all this money that we paid you. We want you to pay it back. Otherwise, we're going to attack you. So al-Rashid went and sent an army into Constantine, destroyed everything. The Byzantines, they threw Greek fire at them, chopped down trees and burned them so they couldn't run through. But the Abbasids got through anyways, killed people, stole stuff, all that. And Nikephoros had to submit and said, I'll pay you the jizya, which is a poll tax. Anyone that was a Jewish or Christian minority within the Abbasids' control, they would have to pay that.
Right.
So he said, yes, I'll pay it. But then he goes back on his word, says he's not going to pay it, and that arises more issues. Isfahani didn't, at least in the excerpt that was provided, it only went so far as Nicephorus saying, I'm not going to pay it. It didn't go to the response of al-Rashid hearing that. But the style of Isfahani's writing, being a musicologist, he focuses on poetry. He has different poets within the Abbasid Empire speaking, so he references the kind of secondhand source in a way. So Abu Atahiyya, the excerpt that he provided from Atahiyya was al-Rashid being glorified, saying, you stretch your hand out to the Easterner, you stretch your hand out to the Westerner, we all pray for rain under you and you provide it. It's very much glorification of the Caliph. Abu Muhammad, he's more so looking at Nicephorus and saying, no matter what you do, great God is going to know what you're doing, and you will never be apart from the Caliph. Al-Rashid will always have some power over you, no matter how far away you try to go. You will always be under his jurisdiction. Some of the terms that they use for al-Rashid, they called him the Imam of God's guidance. His name means guider, redeemer, or something like that. Commander of the faithful. So very positive ways of referring to someone. And also scornful of the Byzantines. They didn't look too highly upon them. So I'd imagine this is very much, it's very like viewing outside groups as maybe not the kindest to your dynasty. So it definitely has its biases. There was one part where he references a different writer named Yeshia or something like that, started with a Y, and says, he didn't want to say something to the Caliph, so he sent people, paid him off to do it. A footnote said, no, he got this wrong. So there are aspects of Isfahani's writing that aren't completely accurate, but overall he does a pretty good job, and that's supposed to be Rashid. And apparently he's in video games too.
He's in video games?
There's some, when I looked up his name, there were some CGI renderings of him from some video games. So
Probably Assassin's Creed.
Probably. I didn't think that was the most accurate.
Okay.
Yes.
It's really not accurate.
Reference.
Wonderful. Do we have any questions? Just leave it up there for a second. Any questions or comments? All right, you can. I'll make a couple of comments here. Let me just go back through it and highlight a couple things that you said here. You talked about the Caliph Harun al-Rashid, at one time wide receiver for the Minnesota Vikings, by the way, Harun al-Rashid. No, I'm just kidding. I knew that would wake you up if I said that. He is, that is the golden age. That is the apex of it. And notice that his years overlap with Charlemagne. Right? In fact, Harun al-Rashid sent Charlemagne a gift when he was made emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. He was crowned in 800 on Christmas Day. He sent him an elephant as a gift. I'm not quite sure what Charlemagne did with the elephant, but he sent it to him. And because, in fact, the Abbasid dynasty was much advanced over Europe at this time in medicine, science. We tend to think of maybe the Arab world being backwards and not as advanced. Certainly wasn't in this time. The learning, all the center of learning from the ancient Greeks and Romans, most of it made its way into the Arab world. there it was not only stored, preserved, but it was expanded upon in mathematics, medicine, science, astronomy. The list goes on and on. Then reintroduced back into Europe via Spain, mostly, and that was the impetus for the Renaissance, with especially the writings of Aristotle and others that were preserved and expanded. So, at any rate, Harun al-Rashid is quite a guy, all right? We don't hear a lot about him. And this is interesting. He focuses on music. What was the most interesting thing did he say about the music? Do you remember? It's a book of music.
Yeah, book of songs.
Book of songs.
I don't know if that's just in reference
just
to
a song.
Poetry.
Yeah.
Maybe that was
Poetry more.
like
Mm-hmm.
verbally or orally presented in
Right.
maybe a more melodic way or something.
Okay. Yeah, and a lot of poetry becomes the lyrics to songs. I mean, in fact, the word lyric is from a poetic standpoint, lyric poetry, and lyrics for songs. And often poetry was recited in a rhythmic fashion with music. Notice here that you also mention the jizya, the tax. Just to clarify that a bit, it is called a poll tax here. Mainly, I sometimes call it the non-military participation tax, because in fact, in the Islamic world, if you were not a Muslim, you could not serve in the army, in the military. And most everybody was intended to serve in the military, males anyway, to serve in the military. So if you were a Christian or a Jew, anything non-Muslim, you were then exempt from military service. To make up for that exemption, you paid a fee. So it's sort of a non-Muslim tax. Yes?
You couldn't join the military, but they wouldn't kill you, right?
They wouldn't.
They wouldn't kill you, right?
No, they wouldn't kill you. No, there were a lot of people within the Islamic world. There were a lot of variety, really. Once you get past the first 100 years or so, there were a lot of non-Arabs that were under their control. There were a lot of people that did not speak Arabic. There were a lot of different religious groups like Jews and Christians, Zoroastrians and others. It was a pretty diverse thing, but they had certain rules. One of the rules was most everybody had to serve in the military. The only way you got out of it, I guess, religiously. I know there were people, I'm sure, that got exempt from military service by paying a fee. Here in the United States, we did that. In the Civil War, even. You could pay a fee. If you came along, you were supposed to go to war, I could hire, somebody to go in my place. And so if I was a wealthy guy, I said, well, I'm not going to go to war. I'll hire this guy, and he's going in my place. Yeah.
Why didn't we do that with Vietnam?
Well, most people feel that it was being able to pay your way out of military service is inherently unfair because it favors the wealthy. The wealthy don't have to go, and then the guys who are poorer go. I mean, that's the idea about it. And, of course,
Selective Service Act has been in place since 1917.
yeah. So the bottom line is, even when people are selectively serviced or chosen at different times, we still have selective service today, although we have a voluntary military. So we don't actively use it right now. That could change.
Are you talking about every male is 18 has to register?
You have to register, but no one gets drafted.
You're still registered, put into the system for things that...
I know you're registered and put into the system, but you are not required to serve. It's your choice to serve. We have a voluntary military. We don't have a mandatory military. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a draft. We have not had a draft since the 70s. So
Didn't go over well.
we had a draft for quite a while. We will have a draft again if we get into a major war, I'm sure, because we get into a major war, people will stop volunteering, and then we'll go to a draft. And that's why they have the selective service. It's more a backup plan. We've got everybody registered. They can enact it at any time and begin calling people up. That's the point of it. Now, I think one thing that is interesting is that I don't find anyone protesting who might be protesting that only men have to do selective service. Why no females are entered into the selective service process? Well, I'll let someone else take up that cause. But don't worry, I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. At any rate, this jizya tax is basically an exemption where you pay a fee because you're not serving in the military. Now, of course, you're not allowed to serve in it. Even if you wanted to and you were a Christian, you could not serve in the military because they had to be a Muslim. You had to be a Muslim to be in the military. All right.
What point in time is that?
What point in time is what?
That you couldn't be a non-Muslim in the military?
Well, that starts early on with Islam. Yeah, because here's the thing with Islam, there is no separation of religion and the state, or however you want to look at it. Political. Muhammad was a religious leader. He was also a political leader. He was also a military leader. All those things were together.
So it's like the opposite of Christianity, like, instead of them being separated, like they're combined together, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, certainly here in the United States,
That's nice.
yeah, we have the separation of church and state. That, I mean, they don't even have that in Europe right now. If you go to England, they have a state church, Church of England. People pay taxes, it goes to pay for the church.
Things haven't changed since the American Revolution.
And so for us, right, yeah, for us, we have a very much a distinction between.
For England, it hasn't changed. Yeah.
England's not changed in that. I mean, some people have protested it, but still tax money is going in England to fund the Church of England. But at any rate, yes, we have this system in place here. But for Muslims, from the very beginning, from the time of Muhammad on, I'd have to check the modern, like say a country like, let's say Jordan. In Jordan, every male is required to go into the military, every single one. Now, if you go to the university, they postpone you going into the military until after you go to the university, and then they usually shorten your time, I think from 4 years to 2 years or something like that. But those rules sometimes change. But I'd have to look and see if somebody lives in Jordan and they're a non-Muslim. It may not be the case in Jordan because they're fairly open. But this tax was in place for hundreds of years, and it's a kind of non-Muslim tax. You might see it as punitive fine or something like that. But it is given, at least the rationale for it is, the males in your family would otherwise have to serve in the military, and now since your family is Christian, they do not. So you pay this fee, this tax.
I was wondering, because like the Pact of Umar
Yes.
said the one way to get out of it was to serve in the military.
Yes.
And
That's going to be
the
interesting.
Pact of Umar, you have to be Christian, Jewish, or Zoroastrian.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. We'll have to check on that. We should check on that. It is the typical thing. Now, perhaps some of that altered at different times, but sort of the standard default was you had to be Muslim. Now, maybe
it wasn't mandatory service if you were Christian.
Right.
You had to volunteer.
You could volunteer,
to
yeah.
out of the pact.
All right, so perhaps you could serve in a certain way. Yeah, maybe not. I don't know if they want you to have arms. I mean, this is
Right.
this
They're
is
sending you to fight Christians.
Yeah.
You know.
yeah. Yeah, that'll be interesting to compare the Pact of Umar.
It kind of reminds you, it contradicts the Roman Empire, how they would incorporate a bunch of different groups and essentially
Yes.
make them fight versus them. It was
Right.
one specific group, and they would avoid doing that. So
This was a way, at least, it'd be interesting to study it down through time and see how often this tax is imposed and how many times there are exemptions or altering of it. For the Romans in the beginning, you're talking about they encouraged people to serve in the military. They didn't in the beginning. In the beginning, it was you had to be a Roman citizen to be in a Roman military. Later on, they began, as their population flattened, their growth, Romans began having less and less children, and they had more and more sort of conflict on the borders, so they needed more military. They actually encouraged people to join the military as a perk. You could become a Roman citizen, or it's your path to Roman citizenship, which had always been closely guarded, and it would be handed out only as an honor. For example, an emperor might decree that a town or a municipality, that its citizens could be now Roman citizens as a reward for them doing some kind of service to the empire. That's probably how Paul became an emperor, or became a citizen, because of a decree like that. It's people of Tarsus. So, but later on, of course, as they have more and more troubles, we'll see that they need more and more soldiers, and it gets harder to get. Well, you might say, well, a voluntary army is a better army than a drafted army.
It's a smaller army.
You might say that because you'd say, well, anybody who joined wanted to join. They were not sort of forced to join. But when conditions change, then nobody joins, and you've got to have that kind of army. I don't know if that's always the case, but an argument could be made in that. But this is what this tax is about. So I think it's interesting that it's mentioned here, and this became a kind of tax. And I imagine it did sort of just become a tax that somewhat becomes separated from its original intent. It just becomes kind of a non-Muslim tax after a while. Maybe with Umar, we'd have to check. I'll be interested to hear what you say about that on Wednesday. If there's no questions, we'll end it there.